Thank you so much, Rika. Thanks so much to Thomas, Catherine, John. Really fascinating and of course enjoyable. Why do we do all we do if we don't do it for one reason, to have fun on the way while creating real impact and changing people's lives? Now, coming up next, cybersecurity is a milestone in the digital age and definitely something that makes sure we live in a safer world. Obviously, this topic is very, very, very important, and that's why we have invited the right people, some of the leaders in the world of cybersecurity, who will share with you their thoughts and their vision. And there's no one better than Rhett, columnist at Forbes and In Magazine, to do this panel and to moderate it. Rhett, thanks for coming back again for Webit Global Impact Week. The floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Rhett Power from Forbes, and it's a pleasure to be here with you at Webit Global Impact Week. And today's discussion is fascinating to me. I was telling the panelists before we came on, I know absolutely nothing about cybersecurity. And so for me, this is a fascinating conversation. And I imagine for most of you as well, who sometimes this is a really hard topic to get your head around. And we've got some of the world's top experts to help us understand what's in front of us, what we should be paying attention to, and what the future looks like in cybersecurity, and why that's relevant to you and your business and to what you're doing. So the panel today is Alessandro Menna. He's the Chief Security Officer at Italgas. Alessandro, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rhett. It is my pleasure.
And so how long have you, at Italgas, I'm sure you deal with cybersecurity threats all the time. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you. Well, actually, I've been appointed as the Chief Security Officer of Italgas since last year, so it is quite recent, my new job. But I've been dealing with cybersecurity since a while. I started the design of the brand new business unit within one of the major aerospace and defense and security company globally. And then after that, I also moved to one of the largest European consulting firm, launching, let me say, starting the Italian cybersecurity practice. And therefore, I've been dealing with the cybersecurity threats and issues, let me say, since a while. And nowadays, acting as an end user, let me say, managing security for a critical national infrastructure, it is a completely different perspective, but the challenges are still the same, let me say, from another perspective, but still fighting cyber threats.
Indeed. And Dian, Kelley, thank you for joining us. You are CTO and co-founder of SecurityCurve.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today, Rhett.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I fell in love with computers and networking way back in the 1970s when I was still a student. And when I graduated and started working in IT, I was doing network work, systems administration, and I worked my way up to managing a global network for a startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And some bad guys got onto my network. And at that point, I pivoted and didn't just focus on systems administration, but focused on how to secure the networks and systems that I was bringing together so the business could keep running. And I've had a long career, so well over 30 years in the business. I have had executive roles at IBM Security and Microsoft. And currently I am working at my own company, SecurityCurve, where I do advisory work for CISOs and CSOs, as well as vCISO or virtual CISO work for companies.
Thank you, Dian. Luigi Rebuffi, he is Secretary General and founder of the European Cybersecurity Organization. Luigi, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening or good afternoon, everybody, depending on how it's going, the time. And yeah, I'm pleased to be with you. And I'm a nuclear engineer, actually. And when I was completing my studies at the time, back in the 80s, I started doing computers and hacking, also with the first terminals, from punching card to, at the time I was starting hacking, but then I changed. I went to other issues, especially on European cooperation, let me say, European programs, always on technology. And that where I came back to cybersecurity in the bit more than 5 years ago for the creation of the European Cybersecurity Organization, which is a public-private partnership with the European Commission, and also with the Foundation of Women for Cyber, which is a foundation dedicated to cybersecurity to help women to contribute to this challenge domain.
Thank you, Luigi. General Robert Maslin, he's the Chief Technology Strategist at the Ray Group.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's a privilege to participate.
Thank you, General. What is the background? What is your background in cybersecurity?
I'm a former military officer, served in the Canadian Forces, and ultimately, before leaving, I ran network operations, cyber operations, and signals intelligence and electronic warfare for the Canadian military. And just prior to retirement, I served a few years at United States Cyber Command. I was responsible as the Vice Director for Force Development Planning and Strategic Planning. Since in the last few years, I've joined the Ray Group. We're a company that works primarily in the space and cyber domains, providing secure solutions for critical infrastructure, space systems. Key clients are the European Union, European Space Agency, and critical infrastructure organizations in Europe.
So you have a very interesting perspective, I'm sure, on the threats that are out there that we all face. I'm sure it's maybe scary in some ways. So thank you all for joining us today. And I wanted to start, Dian, with you. What led you, you talked a little bit about what led you to get into cybersecurity. What are you seeing with the clients that you work with? What's sort of the #1 threat that you're seeing?
Well, I would say that the largest threat or the biggest concern, or the biggest issue right now with organizations is trying to get a coherent handle on their security program, especially with the rapid change in technology, this digital transformation that got accelerated by the pandemic. And now with the focus and attention on supply chain security, most companies now have to fill out SIGs, standardized questionnaires, information gathering questionnaires, in order to work with partners. And more recently, there's been a requirement for SBOMs or software bill of materials, which is putting a lot of reporting pressure onto organizations. So they were struggling with enough resources for their security program. Now they also have to do this additional layer of being prepared to report out into the supply chain on their security, as well as testing to the security of all their partners and their contractors. So that's a lot of work, given again that there's a resource pressure. But the other side of it, if you talk to a lot of CEOs, what they're really concerned about is what they're reading in the headlines. So they may be feeling this pressure of supply chain security, but they're seeing a lot of headlines about ransomware. So I get a lot of inbound questions on, I'm frightened of ransomware. How can we make sure that our company is going to keep going with ransomware? So it's that balance between a strong security program, dealing with resource issues, and just tackling what's really top of mind based on headlines.
Anybody have anything to add? Luigi, you were going to say? What were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this comment because I was not expecting something like supply chain, because we have, so maybe we see it from a European perspective. It's supply chain is very much growing as a geopolitical issue, and it's not only the fact that, well, we have the different point of view from the operators, but maybe Alessandro can say more, because as his position of an critical operator can say, really the challenge they have to have a certain level of supply chain, trusted supply chain. But actually, when looking at the European point of view, the many discussion we had in the last 3 years about 5G and all these geopolitical context, the trade issues between US and China and Europe is in the middle, somewhere in the middle, let me say. So the trusted supply chain, where in Europe we try to push it by also the certification of products and so on, but it's only part of the solution. I mean,
Sure.
trust the supply chain, and it's really one of the big issues we have to face also for the future, because it will evolve all the time. There's no perfect solution. There is no perfect trusted supply chain, and we have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Alessandro, did you want to comment?
Yes, actually, we have opened a very complex discussion, I think. Thank you, Dian. Thank you, Luigi. I can confirm that for sure what concerns supply chain security is of paramount importance nowadays for sure for every organization, and I would say more than ever for any critical national infrastructure. This is part of the kind of priorities we will collectively as a community need to tackle, to address to some extent. Of course, there are other, let me say, priorities we necessarily have to work on. Let me mention one in my mind, which is really the lack of skills, for instance, which is absolutely one of the major issues we are facing nowadays, because skills are definitely very, very rare to be found. And as far as we are all nowadays very much connected, of course, every business is connected to its own customers. It's not only the supply chain, then the overall awareness of what are the risks associated to cyber domain. It is really another big issue. We are all acting trustless, let me say, in order to become a bit safer. But in fact, what is behind the lack of awareness, the lack of understanding of real risks, is a huge number of initiatives, starting from the management of the identities of the various stakeholders that actually interact with any organization. And most of the kind of, let me say, stakeholder of the digital infrastructures every organization deals with are actually stakeholders or users, let me say, that the organization cannot really manage, because typically they access their own, the organization's network and assets with their own devices, for instance, or they use commercial communication systems. So it is a very, very complex issue, the one of identity management, and related to that, the awareness that sits even, let me say, before that, at the end user level.
General, what do you think?
Yeah, again, as Alessandro had indicated, I mean, this is really a big Pandora's box, and I just kind of look at it, you know, from the perspective of increasing the digitalization of our society that has been accelerated by the pandemic. I mean, this has led, you know, this has led to a proliferation of IoT devices that's created new pathways, you know, for cyber attacks. When we start looking at the convergence of 5G and mobile technologies and the tremendous advantages, and you couple that with a number of the disruptive technologies, you know, we start looking, you know, quantum computing. I mean, there's significant focus on that as an increasing threat. When we take a look at how organizations manage their environments in a cloud environment, you know, in terms of embracing these concepts, and given the unprecedented, you know, rush that companies had been forced to make to move to cloud environments. I mean, probably over 3/4 of them had moved to that environment without a clear plan on that front. So you're looking at disruptive technologies that are dual use in nature. The technological solutions that in theory are supposed to be enablers of society, you know, have a double-edged sword, if you will. They also at the same time create pathways, you know, for cyber attacks into both intellectual property for companies and as well as the critical infrastructure. So we start looking at solutions, you know, in terms of how do you automate this environment. Alessandro mentioned, and Luigi both mentioned the skill shortage in this environment. So increasingly drives us to look at, you know, techniques such as artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to provide automated responses and on this front. So it really, you know, we create an environment of wicked complexity, if you will. So it becomes an argument, you know, of strength and capability in terms of versus complexity. You know, basically cyber research is being, the limits of cybersecurity research and capability development and the operations are really being pressed to the limits in this environment.
mean, it seems to me one of the challenges for small and for all business is, do you have the right technology? Do you have the right? Are you getting the right advice on how to protect your data, how to protect your customers? And to an extent, it's a little overwhelming. And so, share with us your thoughts on how small, medium enterprise, maybe even larger businesses, what should they be paying attention to? What do they need to? What questions do CEOs need to be asking? What kind of questions do leadership in these businesses need to be asking the people that are responsible for their security? Is there some advice that you can give leaders on the questions they should be asking?
Well, I'm actually
anybody jump in.
So I love that you asked that question, because I'm on the advisory board for the Cybersecurity Council at CompTIA. And we just actually published, it's free, anybody can download it. We just actually published a document as a working group on the 10 questions that every CEO should ask their providers. And we really tried to structure it in a way that would be very business oriented in the language of the business, and then gave them not just the start off questions of things like, do you have a handle on your inventory, but then gave them some leading questions after that to be able to follow up with their provider, so that they could start to get a handle and a comfort level with whether their providers are putting them into a good position. In addition to that document, which again is free, I would really strongly recommend that CEOs actually sit down and talk to either their advisors or their CISOs, whoever's managing security for them, and talk through the last assessment that the company had, and get a feeling, they don't have to know every bit and byte and the way that every single widget is turned left or right, but to have an understanding of where are our deficiencies, where are our exposures, because right now your digital and exposures, your attack surface, your vulnerabilities are not just technical, they're woven into the business. And I think we've all sort of touched on that all risk now is business risk is connected to technical risk. So I think it really does make sense for the CEO not just to ask these top level questions, or are we staying on top of it, but to really talk through whatever the last assessment, the big assessment that the company went to for security, and understand why do we have these exposures and how do we prioritize? Because I think the biggest mistake that CEOs make is it's kind of like, it's not business, or it's really too technical and I don't want to get involved. You don't have to become a security expert, but you need your security experts to be able to explain to you what the true risks are.
Let me add thank you for that answer, but I want to add a question to that, because your answer sparked something another question really. Has the pandemic made us less secure? And I think the general touched on this a second. Are people working from home? Does that increase the threats to our networks? And I guess someone said the using more iOS devices or mobile devices is also increasing the threat. Is that something that is now an added element that we need to pay attention to security wise? And again,
but automatically we have increased the number of let's say transaction, whatever kind of transaction means, interaction as well, if you want. So automatically, statistically, I would say you increase your exposure and the number of attacks somehow. So then the behavior of people which are not used to work in a certain environment, maybe they're working from home, thinking they're working like from the office, which the office environment is protected, while from home you say, okay, I have no problem. Who is looking at me from home? But actually people are looking to everybody. And especially if you have a certain name and you belong to a certain company.
Wait, well, it's easier to get into somebody's home network, right?
Yeah.
So that's their entry point.
Well, that's it. Yeah, Diana, we wanted to add something.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Luigi was saying, is that, we've created a much bigger attack surface, because now so many people are working from home. We have increased the number of devices. I think the general was discussing about IoT devices, also our mobile devices like iOS and Android. And as we have to now, I think this is the new world. We need to be prepared for a work from anywhere kind of world, not assume that people are going to come into offices necessarily. Some will, some won't, and then figure out new ways to ensure we've secured everything. And a couple of ways that the companies are doing this is, one is actually getting setup advice for the home. So there are certain things you can do on your home network that will really strengthen it. For example, you don't need to have your work network the same network that your kids are playing games on, or that your smart fridge is reporting about your milk to you. So you can create separate networks. It's very easy with today's technology. So just helping home users be a little bit, home workers be a little bit smarter, and giving them even kits on how to set up secure networks. The other big movement, and I think that Alessandro was really touching on this as he was talking about the complexity of identity, is this more identity-centric approach to security, which is a component of zero trust. Sorry for the buzzword, but zero trust is really going to help us with this environment now where it's work from anywhere with many, many devices, because it is identity centric, not just you as a person's identity, but also your devices have identities, and your systems and your apps have identities too.
There's a couple of points. I think both Dian and Luigi touched on a couple of key points there, and again, it speaks to really, we're looking at helping posture, small to medium enterprises, within which a significant portion of a nation's intellectual property is contained, but also large organizations. And it just kind of draws me back to my days in the military. Is how do you approach very complex problems? And when we take a look at the current state of network operations, the traditional role of the CIO has evolved significantly now, and the responsibilities of the CISO has become much more complex. And really what we're looking at, when you take a look at the reliance of businesses on the network-based capability, it really speaks to a new realm of operations. So, how do we attack something like that? And in my mind, it goes back to this whole issue of what are the doctrine and standards, what are the tactics, the techniques, the procedures, the training involved? Because, clearly a significant portion of the breaches are as a result of human error and failure, whether planned or not. So little things like that, in terms of, and also enforcing, basic practices on the network environment, getting some granular visibility into the extended perimeters. And we've now moved to a perimeterless environment, with the evolution of the reliance on cloud. Prioritizing patching for critical assets. What is your vital ground? What is the important elements of your businesses? Patching those assets, keeping an inventory of all the hardware and software, and having a real-time view of situational awareness on your networks, and setting up secure user identities, making VPNs open to all members of the team, auditing users on a routine basis, making sure that you have configuration control of the networks. So a lot of the basic practices, if enforced correctly, can ameliorate a significant portion of the problems, because in many cases we see a big avenue of egress is through spear phishing, poor passwords, poor user practice, and a lot of that can actually be mitigated by taking some very simple, straightforward steps. I mean, simple in terms of they're conceptually, they're not difficult. When you try to apply them in an enterprise perspective, I mean, some discipline is involved, most certainly.
Thank you.
If I can just add a few words on this, General Mazzolini and Dian and Luigi have absolutely perfectly addressed the topic. But from my perspective, if I can add a few elements, COVID-19 impact has essentially accelerated dramatically, let me say, some of the trends that were already present to some extent, but they have been necessarily very much stressed and accelerated. I mean, the move to cloud, for instance, has been accelerated by the COVID-19 because of the somehow the resilience of the system actually was demanding such a move to some extent. Of course, it has been repositioning the role of the CIO or the Chief Security Officer or the CISO in general, but more in general, has repositioned the understanding of IT and IT security, not anymore as an operational cost, but nowadays it is much more perceived as really a business enabling factor, the IT in general and security associated to it, to the IT. What I think that has been also proved through the kind of threats that actually we have been experiencing over the past 18 months at least, is that piecemeal approach to cybersecurity is not effective at all, of course. But this was typically the approach adopted by several organizations, putting some initiatives there in order to patch some of the problems they've been experiencing, but not having a really comprehensive strategy, let me say. So nowadays it is much more clear that organizations have to develop their own comprehensive, let me say, end-to-end strategy. And according to this kind of strategy, nowadays it is very much clear, I think, definitely more than in the past, that the strategy itself has to be based upon risk understanding of the infrastructure, of the business, and of the IT, let me say, elements that are actually enabling each business process and functionality. This is, I think, one of the major benefits that, let me say, in turn, we can experience through the COVID-19 pandemic, that of course has got a very negative, let me say, effect, but in terms of digitalization process has also dramatically accelerated the digitalization of the system, let me say.
Thank you, Alessandro. I wanted to ask you all about something you hear a lot about, and that is the blockchain. Is this something, it's an interesting question because I was in a conversation with a CEO this week, and his statement to me was, that's going to solve all of my problems from a security standpoint. Does that make sense to all of you, or is that true? Or is that a problematic sort of assumption? And go ahead, anybody want to jump in?
It is a difficult question because it is very blockchain technology, let me say, it is very, very fashionable, in my opinion. I mean, there are several applications of blockchain, of course, that are very useful. But I don't see blockchain, let me say, technology as really the game changer for security, in my opinion. I see several benefits, like notarization of processes, so you can have a lot of automation to that regards. But frankly speaking, I don't see that as really the key component of any security framework. I see as just, let me say, one of the necessary capabilities.
Well, I had the discussion yesterday in Brussels with friends, with experts, and I had the same question with them actually, and say, what do you think? And they actually, the position is more or less what Alessandro said. It's good for a certain application, not necessarily for security. And actually, also there is one well-known expert in cryptology from Belgium, which is saying that you can fake blockchain. You can if you put enough resources, you can make something fake in the chain. And so it's cannot assure security.
Yeah.
Go ahead, General. And Dian, you'll be next.
Please, ladies first.
Okay. Dian?
Thank you, General. Yeah, I complete agreement with Alessandro and Luigi, which is that the first question is, what problem is he trying to solve? Because in security, there are people that would love an easy button and just, a simple, oh, that's it, everything's secure, but this is just not technically feasible. And blockchain has certain use cases that it's good at. You also have to look at how you're deploying the blockchain, because you can either do proof of work or proof of stake. When you do proof of stake, it's actually not as secure as proof of work blockchain in most of the implementations, but proof of work is very, very, very high intensive when you start to scale out. If you've heard about in the cryptocurrency deployments of blockchain, the crypto mining, that there are crypto mining data centers that are, blowing off a lot of heat. In some areas, they're even being shut down because of the very heavy intensive energy use. So proof of stake can be very intensive. Proof of work and proof of stake it's actually not technically the same as the proof of work. So if nothing's going to solve all of our security problems, it's always going to be a layered approach. And even for very specific security problems, blockchain still may well not be the right answer.
Yeah, I was looking to add, again, I think, there are, as Deanna had indicated, there's probably some selected environments that it has some applicability. I mean, when we look today, in the context of privacy and digital trusts, perhaps one of the areas that's, most relevant, where we have an environment of, globalization and the growth of a digital economy that's essentially colliding with emerging privacy regulations and consumer preferences. So to some extent, it may provide an avenue of enabling, verification, enabling consumers to have some more control over the data, but and business processes. But I'm not sure it's the panacea that potentially it's made out to be.
Yeah, go ahead, Diane. What you were going to add?
I was just agreeing. I love that phrase that, it's not the panacea that we're hoping for. Yeah.
I think I agree. So another question is about social media, and what questions should we be asking as company leaders and leaders in our businesses about social media and what is posted and how we access those accounts? Is that a threat? And I don't know if that's an understandable question, but it seems to me that that social media poses certain threats to companies. Can you guys expound on that or talk about that, or is that sort of an off-base question?
No, I'll start. I would say, first and foremost, I mean, there's many aspects, to the issue of social media, but I would say certainly, especially now, when we look at, particularly in this COVID environment and post-COVID environment, where the intermixing of personal and professional lives, it's almost become indistinguishable, and that social media is so pervasive. What we see is, where big challenges present themselves is that individuals in the course of their work or in terms of their own personal, manifestations on the net, how they represent themselves in the context of their company. I mean, we've seen a number of issues that relate, individual employees, or whether it's military service members or individual employees of companies undertaking activities or expressing views on social media that may be in contrast to the values and ethics and principles of their company or of their organization. So that's one of the key areas that I see companies starting to really begin to be more explicit in the guidance that they provide to their employees on that front. And then as well, the use of social media on company infrastructure. Once again, these are certainly very innovative pathways of egress into a large institution's infrastructure. So again, one needs to be very careful on that front. Just a couple of thoughts off the top of my head.
Yeah, I would add to that there's the big issue of societally, is it impacting mental health, about disinformation, about important societal things like, safety of COVID vaccines and stuff. But when we look very narrowly at what the businesses need to think about and outside of the larger societal issue, two areas I would really caution companies to look at and talk to their employees about. The first one is the use of social media in, as the general was talking about, spear phishing. And spear phishing is very focused email trying to get you to click, or BEC, which is business email compromise. The way that a lot of these attackers are able to craft an email that comes from someone who knows who works with you, knows their names, knows if you were at a party last night, they're using your social media. They know who you work with because LinkedIn is there. They know what their titles are because of LinkedIn. They may know what parties your company went to for the holidays because of Twitter. So helping folks understand that just because you get an email that knows a whole lot about you, train your users to think, can they know that about me from LinkedIn? I mean, I can tell you right now, if somebody said they know where I went to college, when I graduated, and the names of my pets, I would not assume that they knew anything other than how to look at me on social. So that's one area. The other area with social is that using it as an attack vector to actually connect to people. There was a whole campaign a few years ago called the Robin Sage campaign, and somebody created a user named Robin Sage. I think it's a military activity or a military test, but they created this user named Robin Sage. They used a photo of a very attractive woman. They started befriending people in security and in the military. And then some of these people were sending this user pictures of themselves, and it turns out because of geolocation information within the metadata of the photo, you could tell where they were, and some of them were in theater. So helping your users understand that someone who reaches out to them on LinkedIn or Twitter and pretends to be somebody, even if they've got a lot of connections, they may not be who they say they are. So helping your employees really be very wary of unknown people linking to them on the different social media and trying to engage them.
And that makes a difference when somebody's at work, right? And they're on one of these platforms while they're at work. And so that's got to be a concern. Luigi or Alessandro?
Yeah, I wanted to, you're discussing about the social media as they are today. I was thinking, and I'm discussing also these days, what the evolution of social media will be tomorrow with the, let's call it gamification of social media, which is the meta universe approach, which is coming up. And there you will not realize, you don't understand what is real, what is fake, or what just virtual, let me say. And then you open the door to an incredible amount of issues, not only social, not only security, not only economic, all a different culture. And we are far away from understanding what the change this could be. And actually it could happen tomorrow.
Luigi, I'm glad you brought up the meta universe. I've been talking a lot about it this week with experts, and I think we could have a whole nother Webit Global Impact Week conversation on just that, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Alessandro, what do you think?
Actually, social media has, of course, a great power, as it is a great platform for communicating whatever content. It has opportunities and threats, of course. From the organization perspective, let me say, from the industry perspective, it is not only a great vector for, let me say, developing the business, of course, or communicating to the community, but it is also very much powerful in terms of building the reputation of the organization itself. At the same time, it is a great, let me say, means for security itself, because you can get very easily some weak signals, for instance, or even frauds, for instance, or any kind of security related event, because social media are typically faster than even the media themselves, sometimes at least. So let me say, social media, in my opinion, is incredibly, let me say, powerful. To some extent, could be also dangerous if not, let me say, utilized positively, at least. And please, General.
No, please finish, Alessandro.
it has become, let me say, another specific domain of attention for the organizations in order really to protect even the business. Okay, to protect, I mean, to find potential frauds or potential data leaks, potential information that should not be disclosed whilst it could happen actually. So social media has this twofold, let me say, kind of phases that have to be recognized by organizations and, let me say, citizens in general.
Alessandro touches on a very important element, and actually all the panelists, we look at it in the context of informationalization, and I would extend that in a broader national or institutional context, because when we take a look at now, when we look at societal resiliency, which is largely based on government legitimacy, which is underpinned by the critical infrastructure that's used to support our way of life and societies. And we take a look at that commercial entities, businesses, companies, essentially, own a significant, or the majority of that. They're intrinsically intertwined into the security of the nation. And as we see now, hostile foreign entities, I mean, Western hegemony, as you start looking at the geopoliticization of technology and network operations and technology, Western hegemony was historically based on conventional power and strength. Now, as we start looking at concepts of hybrid warfare, operations in the gray zone, you probably heard that term as well. What we see is that informational effects often now can be marshaled in such a way that they exceed the strength and effectiveness of conventional effects. So we start looking at informationalization and how companies manage information, how they manage their visibility, protect the assets, and to ensure that their clients, who ultimately are citizens or customers or government entities, they have credibility. There's trust in their infrastructure and technology. These are very, very important considerations, and like you say, Rhett, could be the subject of a whole other program.
I agree, General. One thing that I've been thinking a little bit about lately, and I know this is related, and I'll get your help in trying to get my head around, and maybe the audience's head around this, is we hear a lot about labor shortages, and we hear and CEOs and I've been talking to lately that said it's extremely tough right now for them to find talent, particularly in the cybersecurity and the security area, and that they're looking at having to outsource a lot of this work. What questions do they need to be thinking about when they're outsourcing and trying to look for a company in India or a company somewhere else? A lot of this work is being done overseas now. Is that does that worry you? Do you have any thoughts on how you can retain talent or get talent in, and what questions they should be asking? And security wise, what kind of security should they be doing on the people doing their security?
I can share with you my personal opinion, at least so far. I think that we are now very much used to outsourcing several activities. For what concerns cybersecurity activities, I think organizations can actually afford to outsource, let me say, low-level kind of activities like monitoring, let me say, or those activities that can be automatized as much as possible. But I would definitely recommend organizations still to retain a core team for what concern incident management, crisis management, and of course also for what concern the overall governance of their own security posture. Those capabilities at least should be developed internally, at least to some extent, to some level. And I would add also a key component of the security posture of the organizations that leverage digital heavily. It is the intelligence part. Also, intelligence has to be developed internally, at least for what concern really the analysis of the information. So not really the technology implementation part, but analysts should be at least partially owned internally by the organization itself. Those are really key components that cannot be outsourced, because then you may be experiencing a loss of information because your provider of choice has necessarily a turnover, and therefore your own confidential information could be easily dispersed or distributed outside your own company, and this is what we definitely don't want to happen.
Diane and Luigi, General, anybody want to comment?
So as Alessandro touched on, you can't transfer accountability. So you've got to always at least have somebody at your company who's the liaison to who you've outsourced to. But I'd also like to touch on the point about resources, right? If there's a resource constraint problem, we just don't have enough people to do the work, and that's why some companies are outsourcing. But the outsourcers are also having trouble finding the people that do the work. So I think one of the big root causes is that we need to do a better job globally of encouraging and educating people around the world of very diverse backgrounds, genders, colors, education, to get into the practice of cybersecurity defense. They're being recruited to cybersecurity attack on the criminal side. So we as defenders, I think it's really important for us to really create a more diverse culture and help more people get into the work so that companies can hire if they want to outsource, at least they'll know the outsourcer had a great group to hire from. If they're insourcing, same thing, they'll have a much better pool to do the intelligence and do the work.
Yeah,
Diane, I think that's a great another recommendation for us to do a whole nother show on, or a whole nother topic on how to get a more diverse group of people into cybersecurity. I interrupted you, Luigi. Go ahead.
Sorry. I wanted to say I don't have the answer to your question, but it was going exactly what Diana said. I mean, we are working in ECSO to stimulate the education and training of more and more people, because that's what we need more and more. Whatever technology, I was going to say, who cares about the technology? We need more competence about the people, about those who are using the technology, whatever technology will come up in the future. And we need more education of the citizens as well. And so the participation, the full participation at the growth of the society, or this digital transformation, this is important, from the citizen to the professionals. And that's the reason why also we have started with, I said, I'm also the founder of Women for Cyber Foundation, not because it's politically correct, but simply because we cannot ignore 50% of the population, which could become expert, which could be part of this job, of this career, as Diana, of course, is representing. So we are pushing for that, and we are creating a European foundation. And now what is happening, it's very nice example of how this is important, that we are national chapter in different countries of Europe, which are almost being created spontaneously without even pushing it, because there is a real need, there is a real understanding. Is not because gender issue is, as I said, politically correct, but because there is this need is felt both from women and from men who needs more expert, not only from STEM, but also from other skills.
Luigi, I can tell you're passionate about that. General Maslin, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, well, my distinguished colleagues have made some tremendous points, and again, I would say, when we start looking at it, I always tend to look at it from the perspective of when you're looking at industry, that in large part is supporting critical national infrastructure. The trust and the sovereignty elements are very important. So we have to be very, very careful who we outsource to. At the same time, when we look at, it's an issue of trying to leverage, and this I think is becoming more and more part of federal discussions and strategy development, as we see how do we leverage, and we see cybersecurity as becoming a critical industry base in supporting critical infrastructure in different nations? How do they leverage all avenues of society, training, professional development, evolving education programs, wonderful efforts like Luigi is sponsoring with Cyber for Women? He made a great point. You know, you can't in this high demand, low density environment, you can't ignore half of the population that could be potentially be resolving the problems. So I'd say we're starting to see more progressive programs throughout the demographic of education. You see things at elementary school level, programs for kids. We have a great program here in Canada among our cadets that they're developing a cyber field on that front and growing from first principles. So I think demand eventually will start to become addressed as well when we start looking at organizations, you know, like the ISACs that are developing more rationalizing technology architectures for critical infrastructure sectors that normalize not only the technology in the industry base that supports it, but also the related doctrine and operating procedures. So again, it's all about this domain starting to normalize itself from a doctrine and TTP perspective and common processes, and there's a way forward, but very complex environment.
Indeed, and thank you all for sharing with us today. I'm Rhett Power from Webit Global Impact Week, and I'll turn it back over to the studio.